Right, so if you're watching this podcast, you'll see that today we're starting with our coats on because Stingy Bob, our landlord, has decided not to turn the heat on today.
Shout out Stingy Bob.
But on a more serious note, we are here to talk about marketing overwhelm, or more specifically, how marketers are increasingly overwhelmed. And to be fair, always have been overwhelmed to some degree. So we're going to look at the common reasons for that. We're going to look at some less common reasons for that and talk through some of the strategies you can use to mitigate against that risk of overwhelm as well.
Welcome to Truth, Lies and B2B Tech, the podcast that separates hype from reality when it comes to B2B marketing, sales and service technology. Join me, Craig Taylor, and my co-host James Ingham. Both of us have spent our working lives in the world of complex B2B sales, always trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. Along with our incredibly smart special guests, we'll cut through all the bullshit to bring you proven approaches that will help improve how you go to market. Enjoy the show.
Let's be clear. We're not looking at this particular topic as observers. We've been on client side. We've got a lot of empathy with the challenges. We know the challenges firsthand. We've had to deal with them. So, this is very much based on experience. However, I think right now with things the way they are, slow growth economy, we can see that, organizations are under pressure. I wouldn't ever say marketing is always the first thing to go, because I think that's not right in my experience. But I do think increasingly it's under pressure. And with the job market being very slow as well, maybe it's lowest for some years in terms of recruitment. We've also seen redundancies in marketing, and that creates obviously stress in terms of trying to find a new job. But we're really focusing more on those marketeers that are in post. But if they have been part of a team that's reduced, then expectations probably haven't reduced. And in fact, expectations might be even higher given the need for growth.
Well, and naturally, obviously, they're trying to do more with less resource.
Absolutely, as a result.
Team members.
Yeah.
But also they may be encouraged or feel pressured to do more or achieve more results to try and protect their own position in a challenging marketplace.
Yeah. So it feels like we wanted to do this podcast for whoever's listening. Maybe it's non-marketers that work with marketers, maybe just to try and understand the situation for a marketeer, and maybe try and give some support rather than just give them a bit of a kicking, which often happens. We've certainly been on the receiving end of that when we're client side. There are some common reasons for overwhelm. I think if we start with one of the most obvious, and I think that's a fundamental lack of understanding of marketing that you do find quite a lot in some leadership teams.
Yeah, and what that leads to, I think, is what causes overwhelm, because ultimately there's an underappreciation for the effort involved in a lot of marketing activities, which email's a good example. It's a really basic one, but email newsletters are a really good one, and something that isn't exactly at the top of the list for many marketers, but still, nonetheless, having experienced producing and delivering those sorts of activities, a lot more effort goes into them than might be perceived by salespeople or the people in the business, the leaders of that business. And therefore, it could be, the sentiment is, well, it's only a quick email. Why is that taking 2 days or even longer? And if you look at that across all of the various things that marketers are being asked to do, which actually is another area of misunderstanding, that a singular marketeer or a team of 2 or 3 can cover all of the bases, then overall there's an underappreciation for the time, dedicated skills and difficulty of a lot of the activities that get taken place. And therefore, people are asked to do more and try to do more, despite maybe lacking the resources or the skills internally to do it, which of course increases overwhelm.
Yeah, so a misunderstanding in how long things take, but also a misunderstanding in terms of what marketers need to be effective. And, quite often it ends up being a siloed function, and that's not the fault of the marketing leadership. It just can sometimes just be naturally isolated from other parts of the business. But marketing cannot exist in the silo. It's so dependent on a solid business strategy. It's so dependent on support and interaction and alignment with the sales function
and resources. If it is underappreciated in terms of effort, in terms of skill set, etc., then obviously those that are setting those budgets are going to set them lower based on that underappreciation, and so or provide less resources to that team in sort of people power, people power. Naturally, then, with that underappreciation by the people that are setting budgets at the top, that leads to under-resourced teams, because ultimately they're going to have less budget allocated to them. They're going to have smaller teams because people will think that they can do all of that themselves, and that's borne out in the results from a recent study that we both saw in Marketing Week that showed that 54% of marketeers feel that they're now being asked to do more with less, up quite sharply, I think, from around 40% the year before.
Yeah.
And that may be to do with the macro, environmental, political factors we talked about at the start in terms of the increase. But I think both of those stats are still quite high.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine if a business leader's watching this, they'll be thinking, well, we've had to make cuts, we've got increased taxes to pay. There's slow growth, so maybe fewer opportunities. The business is being squeezed, so naturally everyone's going to feel the pinch.
But as a marketer, my challenge, if I was if I was faced with that decision or that cut, my challenge would be, well, then we need to do less. What we can't do is cut budgets, cut resources, cut team members, and still be expected to cover all of the many, many bases that a marketeer is expected to. And that probably leads quite nicely into another point, which I think results in overwhelm, and that's doing the wrong things as well.
Well, I think just going back to that point, though, I think, again, looking at it from a business leader's perspective, if you're an educated business leader from a marketing perspective, you'll appreciate that probably most marketing efforts are going to yield results longer term. So maybe there's a need to get through the next 3 to 6 months, and therefore there isn't inevitably a more short-term focus. So that's maybe where there's some cuts. But then you're maybe a business leader or leaders that don't understand marketing. They always think it's about short-term anyway, and they want immediate ROI from marketing, which it can certainly deliver short-term results, but not from day one. If you're just starting out a marketing program now, it's going to take time to get traction in the market and to see those results. So there's a lot in the mix, really, when it in an environment that's under pressure. Marketeers, I think, are going to feel it quite acutely, alongside the sales team as well, who will be under even more pressure to find opportunities and close business.
Yeah, and absolutely agree with that. I think the point I was making at the start of that was, particularly when you've seen cuts to budget, cuts to your team, really focusing on doing the right things is one way to remove some of that overwhelm. If you continue to try and do what you were doing before with less, you're going to end up with either overstretching yourself and therefore feeling overwhelmed, or getting some things really wrong. And it's far better to do less things well than more things badly. And so really looking at what's working well, making sure that you map that effectively to your buyer journey, and cutting out all of the random acts of marketing that we've both seen lots of over the years is really, really key. And I think, as we were talking about earlier, actually, cutting those things out is a lot easier said than done, because ultimately you're going to get requests from sales teams, you're going to get requests from the leaders, you're going to get shifting priorities and changing perspectives. And the best way that we've seen to eliminate some of that random act of marketing, which is only adding to an already big list, is to set a strategy up front that you get buy-in from the business on, that you agree is the strategy you're going to take throughout that year. And yes, it needs to flex probably to a certain degree, but what that enables you to do and it normally is business leaders that do this, let's be honest, when they knock on your door and say, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and I want a campaign out the door tomorrow, and we've got to shift focus, and I want this done now. What you're able to do is you can say, well, this is the strategy that we agreed. So either, we choose to do that and we don't do something else.
If it's, well, you say, does it support the strategy?
Yeah.
If it doesn't support the strategy, then it's a straight choice.
Yeah.
Do we deviate from the strategy to focus on this particular thing? Or do we not do it?
Which importantly, though, means that something in that strategy isn't going to get done.
Yeah.
You've got to be really clear about that.
It has to be a compromise.
Or the third thing actually is, give us some extra cash.
Yeah.
Because what I can't do as a marketeer is run the strategy that we agreed with the resources that we agreed and then take on all of that and keep all of that going because something's going to give.
So yeah, you in an environment that's a highly pressured environment, which a lot of businesses are in at the moment, you're not going to do your best work. If you're a marketeer that's continually has to justify their existence and being asked to do more with less, reduce budgets, less people in the team to pull on, then it just amplifies that feeling of overwhelm.
Which becomes then a vicious circle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, trying to do too much leads to poor results.
Yeah.
Leads to trying to do more to rectify
You're
those results.
You're overcompensating for this kind of feeling that marketing's not delivering, and therefore, even though you've got all sorts of reasons why and very valid excuses, it still doesn't stop the fact that you're feeling under pressure and you don't want to lose your job. So you go into extreme lengths to do anything you can to stay in that role. It takes a strong marketeer in this environment to push back. But ultimately, it's going to lead to better outcomes than just trying to do as much as you can. Because there are a million things a marketeer could do every day. You have
and
to
that list has
prioritise.
grown recently, hasn't it, with the advent of AI and less recently automation and various other things that have come into the fold.
Going back to the Marketing Week research, not sure why I'm pointing over there because the research isn't sitting over there, but what it did also say is out of all the functions that I think have been part of another study, and which functions internally felt they're going to be most under threat to be replaced by AI, guess which came out top of the list? And it was marketing. I thought you might say marketing. You're going to say HR.
Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Alongside trying to master all of the fundamentals and all of everything else, people are also trying to master or adopt AI to its full potential.
Yeah.
Which is a skill set that most people don't have in the marketing field. And I suppose that's another thing, we touched on it earlier, is that there's a lack of understanding of the specialism of marketing. I think people think that you can have a marketing manager that's going to do it all. One story of a job post that I saw recently was quite insightful, eye-opening, let's say, that, the list of responsibilities of that marketeer, and it was clear that they wanted that person to not just oversee those functions, but deliver them, was quite reflective of that misunderstanding. For example, that CV had the fact that they wanted to oversee website updates, not development to be fair, but, overseeing the website and all of the updates that happen through the CMS.
Content, I'm imagining.
Producing content,
SEO.
Including SME interviews, making sure HubSpot's fully optimized. These are all
developing strategy, supporting the sales team. Yeah, I mean, I think what some organisations do is go, right, we can afford to get a marketeer.
Get one person.
We get one person, but we need to do all these things in marketing. So we need to find this superstar that's skilled in all these different areas.
Don't exist.
They don't exist. It's such a specialist discipline that you can't have someone that can possibly be right up in terms of knowledge, capability, experience in all those different areas.
You accept a job like that, and you go in on that basis, based on CV like that. You're going to struggle to push back.
You're setting yourself up for a fall. Yeah,
you're going to fail for the reasons we talked about earlier. But no doubt you're going to get overwhelmed in the process because you're going to try and meet that really unrealistic goal of trying to do all of those things, and importantly, do them all well, which is obviously what we talked about earlier.
And I think inevitably with marketeers, there's a feeling of imposter syndrome. Like back to your point about mastering AI, I think just because AI suddenly becomes partly under the remit of marketing, leadership suddenly expects you to have mastered those skills.
So another thing about AI is not just the fact that it's being, people are being asked to master it, and that add into their workload and the stress levels and the overwhelm that comes from that. It's also putting pressure on the more with less kind of thing. And a story that we can tell around this, which is, to be fair, was more of a client agency relationship.
Not with us, but
with another that I've been told. Was that AI is seen as this massive opportunity to become more efficient, really scale with less resources, and that pressure is also then put on the team. So there's a misconception as well, and this story kind of emphasizes that, where not us but a friend in an agency was at the early stages of ChatGPT, probably 12, 18 months ago. The conversations that were being had were, okay, well, we've got this ChatGPT now, even when it was back in its infancy and not all that effective. How are we going to scale what we do whilst we pay you the same? And that similar pressure is applied to marketing teams because of AI.
Yeah.
You've got AI now, so you don't need another 3 people to do your job. And we know that is not the case.
Marketing is inevitably going through a change. Certain things that used to work maybe not as effective as they used to be. And we've talked about that a lot on previous episodes of the podcast. So if you're constantly bombarded with this approach and that approach and this way of working, and forget what you're doing there, and that's dead and this doesn't work anymore, some of these new things, inevitably you're going to have that feeling of imposter syndrome if you've not worked in that way, or you've not had experience of doing it in that way. A lot of the time you just have to put it into perspective and realize that much of the kind of rhetoric that's out there is self-serving nonsense from people that profess to be experts but probably not actually that expert. So I think you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, and you've got to think about really making sure, going back to what we talked about earlier, sticking to the strategy, and saying no, and being strong about that, and being realistic about what you can achieve.
We've talked about a lot of reasons that overwhelm happens, but ultimately that solution is the one that's going to get you through most of them. Being strong in your response, referring back to a strategy which has been agreed and got buy-in, removing activity which is either ineffective or not aligned with that strategy, effectively boils down to focusing on the right things and trying to do less.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's always worked for me was the phrase that quite a few of my clients now use and like, which is the random acts of marketing. And I think,
pretty sure you didn't make that up.
I'm pretty sure I did make that up. Because it was based on random acts of kindness.
Okay.
But anyway, this was a long time ago.
Craig Taylor.
Yeah.
2018.
2012, probably.
Dear.
So, anything that comes on to your plate that is aside from the strategy, you badge that straight away as random acts of marketing. And everyone knows that that's a familiar phrase, and you can bat off a lot of those ad hoc requests that marketeers get every day. But I think you have to be strong in an environment like this, and things will improve. And I think you've got to think that you're not alone. Everyone else is in the same boat. Very few marketing teams right now are really thriving. There are exceptions. We've got some clients that are really bucking the trend and growing at exceptional rates. A lot of the time that's because they've got very effective top performing marketeers,
but they are also being properly invested in.
Yeah.
They are also teams that have got the right resources from a human resource perspective to achieve really clear yet ambitious strategy.
Yeah.
Now, everything we've talked about is you can see within those clients that we see are performing. And we should also, I think, reflect on the fact that the industry itself has come a long way. We've talked a lot about the under appreciation of marketing activity, and that's better now, I think, than it ever has been.
Yeah. It's just we're in a very difficult period right now, which is making things a lot more difficult.
Yeah. The days are gone of the make it pretty department or the party planning committee, which I think actually adds its own pressure as well. some marketers may be quite happy with that badge and drawing pretty pictures.
For me, I mean,
ordering sandwiches.
I was probably, I probably got more experience of that sort of period of marketing, if you like, when it was known as the colouring in team.
Well, there was no pressure then, though, surely.
Well, there was no pressure, but you had a real low sort of self-worth and feeling that you didn't really have any, you didn't really make. And I worked in some big companies then as well, which I think is even worse in some respects, because you don't, it was really the sales team that carried the day, and you had very little impact. You played very much a supporting role, whereas you don't in a smaller organisation. You can have far more impact. But things change. Things change really when you start to demonstrate a return on investment, and people can clearly see what you're doing is effective.
Well, that's another way to be able to say no, isn't it? If you can track and prove what does create a return on investment, and it's a hard topic, we've covered it on a previous podcast, then the simple answer is this going to generate more revenue for the business? And if the answer is no, then it's another easy one to bat off. So
in summary then, I think before we freeze to death, because it's highly likely Stingy Bob's going to turn the century anytime soon, so we probably need to wrap up. So I think the key message for us really, yes, it's a very difficult time, and undoubtedly most marketeers are going to be feeling a level of overwhelm, probably far more than normal. So, just take some solace in the fact that you're not alone. And in terms of what to do about it, it's sticking to a strategy, or developing that strategy, agreeing that strategy with the business from a marketing standpoint, and then learning to say no a lot more. Stick to your guns, and you'll get through it. This is not going to last forever. One
final thing to add, I think, is specialise. I think if you naturally, every marketer has a strength in a particular discipline. There are far too many, as we talked about earlier, for one marketer to be a jack of all trades these days, even if they're a jack of a few of them. And if your strength is SEO, your strength is digital, your strength is HubSpot, whatever it is, apply for roles for that specialist discipline. I know that there are people that want to kind of have that breadth of capability, but if you are applying for a role which is specialist, then you know that business appreciates the specialist nature of the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
And you will be able to focus and dedicate your attention on the thing that you do best.
Yeah. I think it's a topic for another podcast, but I think gone are the days of having the generalist marketeer that can do a little bit of everything. I think people maybe back in the day wanted to do that because it naturally led them to be more of a head of marketing or marketing director, where you are across everything. But I think that comes with a different skill set.
And it comes with a properly resourced team.
Yeah.
If you're in a small business and you want to work in a small business, but you're the sole marketeer, or you're one of a few, and you've got limited resources to work with external agencies or bring other people in, then a marketing manager, head of marketing director role even, is a very different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
To one where you actually are operating as that capacity, i.e. pulling strings and
you're in a leadership function that's
exactly
about leading your team, managing people, being very much more commercially aware, managing upwards, managing the C-suite. So it's a very different skill set that you need at that level, which, those kind of skills will naturally evolve as you go through your career.
And you're applying for a head of marketing role at a business of 50 or less people, maybe even 100 or less. You know full well that is because they want that kind of one jack of all trades. If you want to operate at that marketing manager, marketing director level, and a higher level organization, then it's completely different. You will, obviously be operating in that capacity.
Yeah. Bit of a long summary, but I think we got there in the end.
Yeah.
Happy days.
Good. Let's go to the pub.
Thanks for joining us. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to our podcast on your favourite podcasting channel. And if you enjoyed this episode, then do us a solid and leave a review and a rating. If you want more insights and resources, head over to romy-associates.com. We'll see you next time.